Greetings, I'm Brian from RC Workboat Haven. Welcome to part 6 of the 1898 supply steamer build. In part 6, we're going to deal with hawsers, we're going to do some aging around the shipping doors and fenders, we're going to build life rings, deck chairs, deck fence, install masts, a lot of little details in this video. So let's get busy. So we ended part 5 with the model at this stage. We've got 3 main shipping doors, port and starboard. I would imagine that the top panel would slide on a barn door type track. Think that the lower section was hinged in 2 parts and they would swing inwards. I've marked in vertical lines here. It's just a little bit of a light shadow. I want to protect my latex paint and give this boat 2 coats of Fabricating. Up forward, I've located 2 spots for Hawseholes. I'm going to be using grommets from the hardware store. Oh, they're steel with some kind of a brass-looking coating. As I got my gun blue out, so using a cotton swab, and they turn black. Now I've located 8 spots on the hull for the 4 up forward and 4 astern. On each mark, I took a point and I just pressed it in and revolved it like this. It's sort of acting like a center punch. And for a pilot hole, I'm using about a 2mm bit. And now I'll go through with a 1/8 bit. And finally, I'll put the hole all the way through with a 1/4 bit. Now I'm just going to use my step bit by hand, and I'm going to put a little chamfer on the hole and clean it up. And now to install these grommets into the Hawseholes, I hold them with a pair of tweezers and I add CA glue and just position it here and then push it in with my finger. The forward hole would be for the bow line, and the one just aft of that would be for the spring line. And the spring line would be used constantly to maneuver the boat in and out of the berth. So I'm going to drill a 1/8 hole here and here. So now as the steamer comes into the dock, the crew would have the doors open and these lines would be coiled up on the inside and they would just reach out and toss them up. Shipping doors have lead pencil marks under the Fabricating. I'm going to try to emphasize the fact that these doors open. So here I'm using a steel block as a ruler. I've aligned it along the pencil mark and I made a first scratch using a small point. And I'm using a broken piece of hacksaw blade and I'm making a groove all the way along that pencil line. I'm following it up with a very small square file. So here's the first shipping door with the groove finished. Next I'm going to get some slate colored acrylic paint from the dollar store and a very thin brush. So I just paint on the acrylic color and using a damp rag, I just wipe it off like this. And that's the great thing about a Fabricating finish. It can be wiped. So now this area looks quite a bit different. I'm going to add a black stripe. I'm lightly sanding with 80 grit. And I'm going to fit a piece of 1/16 basswood that's been primed with flat black latex and left unprimed on the inside. And I'm going to wood glue this into position here. And here's that black strip glued and clamped in place. I've given this black strip 1 coat of Fabricating. I've cut notches for the hinged part of the door. I've used a file and I've scratched right through the paint right down to the bare wood. I'm trying to give it a rustic, worn, used appearance. I've done the same thing here on the smaller openings, and I've done a little bit around the bottom of the anchor. I'm painting this area with a small brush, and I'm using dark brown latex paint. And now I'm going to wipe this with a damp rag. And that's approximately what I was after. Some kind of a scraping look to it. A little bit of dirt here on the bottom. It looks like these doors are used for cargo. And I'll do the same thing to the small door astern. Get it in the corner like this. With this method, it's always possible to do more or to do less. And I've also put some bumps and scrapes on my fenders. So it's just a matter of roughing it up with a file. So I'm going through the varathane down to the bare wood. Little touch with the sandpaper. Spot of brown paint. And a wipe with a damp rag. And there's a nice wear mark. And here's a steamer with some darker colored mooring lines. They're just temporarily in place. Now I do plan to protect this latex paint with 2 coats of varathane. And here's the steamer with most of the work on the lower hull finished. Next, I'd like to install 2 masts on the steamer. Both masts are a 3/8 inch wooden dowel. The foremast measures 14 inches. The aftermast is 1 inch smaller. 1 inch from the top, I've filed it down and painted it white, and I've used my Spar tan color for the body of the mast. And I've given both masts 2 coats of varathane. I've drilled 2 3/8 holes in the deck, and both are a tight fit. One forward and one aft. Now to install these masts in correct alignment, I used my deck shelf that has latex primer sealer on it, and I wood glued a platform onto that. On top of the platform, I have a wooden block with a 3/8 hole in it. So I applied glue to the bottom of this block. I placed the mast into the hole, put the superstructure on, and then maneuvered the mast into the correct position before the glue tacked up. And I used the same arrangement on the forward mast. And these masts make quite a difference to the look of the boat. And the masts are easily removed, just like the stack. Next, I'd like to fabricate some deck vents. I think I'm going to need about 8 of them. The vents are hollow. They're made of plastic on the angled part. The base is made from a wooden dowel with a hole in the bottom for a screw. For the plastic component of the vents, I'm going to use party flutes from the dollar store. The objective is to make plastic parts that look like this. We're going to use the outer end of the party flute. First, I'm going to use some 100 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to sand this end because it's a lot easier to do now than later. So the first step is to cut it off flat right here at this point. Now I'm using 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to sand it flat. On the inside, it might not be perfectly round, and this little flange can be filed off very quickly. Place the flute back in the vise and cut it off at about a 30-degree angle. And now we've got a piece that looks like this. Set that piece back in the vise and make another cut. It doesn't have to be 30 degrees, but just kind of compromise a little bit. And here's the second piece. Smooth it off. Place it back in the vise and cut that off at 90 degrees. So take the first 2 pieces and align them to the right angle, and then drop some CA glue into the seam. Now take the last piece we cut, set it on the end, hold it with your fingers, and try to get a 90-degree angle in this direction and this direction, and add some CA glue. I set the plastic part on the end of the dowel and CA glue it into position. And if the diameter of your plastic part is a bit smaller, just go down to a 7/16 dowel and it works the same. And here are the 8 deck vents. I've got a couple that are 1/2 inch dowel and the rest are 7/16, and they're all different lengths and no two are quite the same. Next, I'd like to build some under the canopy deck chairs for the passengers. The parts to make a chair are from 1/16 scrap basswood. The slats on the bottom and the back are 7/8 of an inch long, and the upright and the bottom frame is 1 1/4 inch long, and they're cut with a slight radius. And we have two front legs that are about 1/2 an inch long. I've taped on some kitchen cling wrap onto my table grid, and I have a jig here set up to glue together these chairs. On the left, I have a piece of 3/4 inch steel, and that is the width of the back. And I have the two uprights in position with two weights, and I can keep things lined up by looking straight down on the grid. And on the right, I have a 5/8 piece of metal and the same arrangement for the bottom piece. Next, I take one back piece and set it up parallel to this line, and I just set a weight on top of each one to hold it in place. And then I put one drop of super glue to hold each piece. Next, pick up the seat and the back and put them together like this. They just fit over each other. So line up the bottom and the top pieces, get the right slope on the back, and make sure it's square from the front. And then add a drop of CA glue right in here. And holding the front legs on with tweezers, drop some CA glue in there. Now round off the back of the chair right here. Square off the front. Try to make a nice radius on the bottom and the back. Then sand the sides down so everything's even. Just round things off a little bit. And finally, slide the chair along a flat piece of sandpaper. I'm using 80 grit. And make sure it fits square on the floor. So now we've got 10 deck chairs that are all the same. Now these chairs don't fold, but they do stack up. That leaves some options open for our steamer. Next, we're going to make some life rings. These life rings are 1 3/8 inches outside diameter, about 5/8 of an inch inside diameter, and about 1/4 of an inch thick. And they're made of basswood. I'm going to use a drill press. The chuck, I've got a standard 1 1/2 inch core bit. That leaves an inside diameter hole of 1 3/8 of an inch. To make up my 1/4 inch thickness, I'm using scrap pieces of 1/8 inch basswood. And this makes a better life ring because if you can get the grain in the crossways direction, they're much stronger. I've just gone down about halfway. And here's the first ring with a 1/4 inch hole in it. Now put a 3/4 inch core bit in the chuck. Hold the ring with a pair of pliers. And drill down about halfway. Flip the ring. And there's our basic life ring. Next, we're going to use a 1 inch diameter, looks like about 80 grit, rotary sanding disc. And now I'm going to put a 45-degree chamfer along the outside of the ring. And now here's the part that really saves time. Get your piece and you put it in here and turn it. Now get some 80 grit sandpaper that's wrapped around a 3/8 dowel and just sand the inside a little bit like this. And that is a typical life ring, and it's very strong. So now I've got a supply of life rings. I've made 23. I won't need near that many on the steamer. Next step, I'll give them all a coat of latex primer sealer. I arranged some 2mm cord around the life ring in a rough square pattern and then taped it on using a copper foil. Many different colors of life ring are possible. On my supply steamer, I wanted to keep the colors kind of toned down and not too bright, so I've gone with this color here. I think I'm going to go with a dark red color for my chairs, and I've got a bright red for the inside of my vents. And the chairs, the vents, and the life rings have all been given 2 coats of varathane. So to install these vents on the upper deck, I've located 3 holes close to the smokestack. They're not evenly spaced, but kind of offset a little bit. On the bottom of each vent, I've drilled a pilot hole for a number 6 screw. I've sanded the bases off so that when they're tight against the deck, they're in fairly good orientation. And here are the top 3 vents. They can be swiveled a little bit. And here are the 8 vents installed. Now I want my 5 chairs to be placed in kind of a random arrangement under the canopy. And I want to be able to move them and orient them in different directions. So in 5 locations, I've drilled a 3/32 hole and dropped through a small 1/16 cotter pin. On the underside, I bend over the cotter pin. I drilled a hole in each chair right through the last slat with a 2mm bit. Next, I get some thin black wire. I thread it through the hole in the chair and through the eye in the cotter pin, and then twist the wire fairly tight with a small pair of pliers. And I snip the wire off with a pair of wire cutters. And now the chairs can move and swivel a little bit. It might be a bit more natural. Next, I'm going to add some life rings, 4 on each side. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to wire them on. I've located them inside the railing, and that way they'll be out of harm's way. I plan to wire them on here and here. And the wiring here turned out okay. It doesn't really look too obvious. And it looks fairly tidy from the inside. So many of these small details have really changed the appearance. This brings us to the end of part 6 of the 1898 supply steamer build. In part 7, we're going to continue our work and we're going to finish the boat. So I'll see you then.